There's no doubt that the 1980s is the most popular decade among horror film fans. But for me, having lived through the 80s, it means just a little bit more. So for this Halloween video, I'm going to be sharing my favorite horror film from each year of the 1980s. Stick around. Hello, and happy Halloween. Now, initially, this video was going to be a list of my favorite horror films of all time. Unfortunately, that proved to be a daunting task because how do you distill 100 years worth of horror cinema in just a short list? No matter what I did, I was never satisfied. Then I was watching the Accusation Network YouTube channel, and Matt did a video where he talked about his favorite heavy metal albums of each year of the 1980s. And I was thinking, hey, someone should do that with 80s horror. Hey, I should do that. So here we are. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share my absolute favorite movie from each year of the 1980s, talk a little bit about it, and then briefly share some of my runners-up for each year. A couple of ground rules for this video. Number one, I will only be mentioning movies that I actually own in my collection. Since this is a channel dedicated to physical media, it doesn't make much sense for me to talk about a movie if I don't have it. As much as I love Near Dark, I can't talk about it because I don't own a physical copy of it. Number two, no sequels as my absolute favorite for each year because that's just lazy. And number three, I will be going by the release date for each movie here in the United States. So as much as I love to put Society as my number one favorite of 1989, that movie did not get a release in the United States until 1992. That sucks, but them's the breaks. Alright, finally, let's get to it. My favorite horror movie from 1980 is also by my favorite film director, John Carpenter, and that is The Fog. This was actually one of the last of the golden era John Carpenter movies that I saw. I think I saw it on TBS back in 1995, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Mood, atmosphere, dread, those are the key words with this movie. It is just creepy, and I love it. Runners up for 1980, I have a lot of those. This is Friday the 13th, of course, directed by Sean Cunningham. The Friday the 13th series, you can't talk about 80s horror without talking about Friday the 13th. And I can't talk about 80s horror without talking about this one in particular, because this is one of the first scary movies that I ever saw. I'm not sure what my very first horror film I ever saw was, because my memory is fuzzy. So this is definitely one of the first memorable ones that stuck with me as a little kid, especially that ending. Also, we can't talk about 1980 without talking about The Shining. The imagery of this movie really stuck with me, whether it was the blood coming out of the elevator or the twins in the hallway. This was also my introduction into the imagination of writer Stephen King. My mom was a huge Stephen King fanatic. I grew up with Stephen King, and this was ground zero for that. Another early one I saw is this one. This is Terror Train, directed by Roger Spottiswoode. It's Canadian slasher with Jamie Lee Curtis, also with Ben Johnson and David Copperfield as a magician. One of the first big monster movies I ever saw was this one. This is Alligator, directed by Louis Teague, who went on to do Cujo. This is a fun monster movie, practical effects. It's awesome. And Robert Forster, rest in peace, he's definitely the MVP of this movie. This one and King Kong 76 to be exact, were some of my first monster movies. Up next is Motel Hell. This one I discovered in the late 80s on late night television. It's sort of a spoof on the whole rednecky Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of horror. It's a lot of fun. Next up, the infamous Maniac. Filthy movie. It's just gross, sleazy, ugly, and that's why it's great. Last runner-up is Lucio Fulci's Zombie, the infamous Grindhouse legend that is Zombie. I rented this from Netflix back when they still rented out DVDs. I fell in love with it, so I went on Amazon, got my first Amazon account, and bought it and had it shipped to me 2 days later. That's this copy right here. Yes, I have 2 copies of Zombie because I love this movie. So, my favorite horror film from 1980 is John Carpenter's The Fog. Alright, so my favorite horror film from 1981 had its premiere in the filmmaker's home state of Michigan under its original title, Book of the Dead. Yup, my favorite horror film from 1981 is Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. Long story short, I saw the original 3 Evil Dead movies in reverse. I saw Army of Darkness and then Evil Dead 2. Loved Evil Dead 2. Rented a really shitty VHS copy of Evil Dead, and I actually hated the movie when I saw it on that VHS because I thought it was dull, lifeless, and just flat out boring. A few years later, I've come to realize that it wasn't the movie that sucked, it was the VHS. I bought a new VHS from Anchor Bay, remember them? And I was just blown away by how good the movie looked. So, my opinion about The Evil Dead changed, and Evil Dead has become one of my absolutely favorite horror films of all time. As you might have noticed, I love this movie so much, I actually have multiple copies of this. I have the Ultimate Edition from Anchor Bay. This Blu-ray, as you can see, that's the Steelbook version. It's a very, very bare bones Blu-ray. So that's why I kept my Ultimate Edition, because the Ultimate Edition is packed with a lot of bonus features. Runners up for 1981, I have a lot. First up, Friday the 13th Part 2, of course. I love the Sackhead Jason. Still love the Sackhead Jason. I thought he was really, really scary when I was a little kid. Next up is Bad Man. Not necessarily a good movie, but I just love the atmosphere of it. Even the most awkward moments are pretty fun. This is, of course, the 4K Blu-ray combo that Vinegar Syndrome put out. I mean, the 2015 Blu-ray that Vinegar Syndrome put out was stacked, but this is even more bang for your buck. Keeping with the outdoor slasher theme, we have The Burning. This is another fun one, another gruesome one. Some more Tom Savini effects on this one. He actually turned down Friday the 13th Part 2 to do this one. This is, of course, the Scream Factory Blu-ray that I got in 2013-ish. I want to say there's the original one sheet. So yeah, good stuff. Next up, we have Just Before Dawn. This is another creepy, atmospheric movie. I highly recommend you seek this one out. This is the Code Red Blu-ray, of course. I have the one sheet on the case. 1981 was the year of the werewolf, so I couldn't resist talking about American Werewolf in London. I first saw this movie when I was about 4 years old when it first came out. I saw it at the drive-in, so imagine that. This is, of course, the Arrow Limited Edition Blu-ray. There's the back cover right there. It comes with the Blu-ray itself with the reversible cover. I put the original cover on that. It has a booklet, writings on the movie, and a two-sided poster. That is awesome. Speaking of werewolves, we have The Howling, directed by Joe Dante. This is the Scream Factory Steelbook. Here's the back cover right there. And little quote from the movie. Great werewolf movie. Other 1981 movies that I have on Scream Factory Blu-ray include The Funhouse, directed by Tobe Hooper. Excellent movie. Next, there's Halloween 2. This is the Scream Factory 4K Ultra DVD plus Blu-ray edition. This one is stacked with a lot of bonus features, including the television cut of Halloween 2, which is how I first saw the movie. So that's really, really cool. You know, if it hadn't been for the fact that The Evil Dead had its premiere in 1981, this movie would probably be my favorite movie of 1981, and that is My Bloody Valentine. This was also one of the earliest horror films that I remember seeing as a little kid, and that ending is still chilling. It really is. And much better than the remakes. So, my favorite horror film from 1981 is Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. My favorite horror movie from 1982 is Basket Case, directed by Frank Henenlotter. I had heard about this movie when I was younger in various books about cult movies and science fiction and horror and all that. I think I rented this movie and fell in love with it immediately. And this is the Arrow Limited Edition. And of course, I had to put the original one sheet as the cover of the case, booklets, and flyer for Lucio Fulci's Don't Torture a Duckling. There's a lot of bonus features, so this is definitely worth bang for your buck right here. And I got this edition via Diabolic DVD. They were offering this along with a lapel of Belial, the little monster in this movie, so that was pretty cool. Alright, runners up for 1982. First one is Creepshow, directed by George Romero, written by Stephen King. This was my introduction to anthology horror. This is another early one for me. I saw this on cable TV. May have been about 5 or 6, and I absolutely loved it. It's colorful. It's a tribute to horror comics of the 50s. And this is still one of my favorite horror films of all time. This is definitely high up there. I held off on getting this on physical media because the DVD that Warner Brothers put out for a long time was pretty bare bones. So thank goodness for Screen Factory for getting this out with a plethora of bonus features. Next up, some more Tom Savini goodness with The Prowler, directed by Joseph Zito. Not the best slasher film in the world, but it's another creepy movie, and the gore effects are mwah. I know that this one is extremely popular and trendy now, but I have to mention Halloween 3 because it is just really, really spooky. I mean, Tommy Lee Wallace, who directed this installment, really captured the spirit of Halloween, and I love John Carpenter's music in this, and it's actually a good movie. Speaking of John Carpenter, the last runner-up is, of course, The Thing. And what else can you say about The Thing that hasn't already been said? It's amazing. If you haven't seen it, watch it now. So, my favorite horror movie from 1982 is Basket Case. My favorite horror movie from 1983 is more John Carpenter and more Stephen King. That is Christine. This was absolutely terrifying as a 7-year-old, and I loved every second of it. It still packs a punch 40 years later. Okay, runners up for 1983. First, we have Sleepaway Camp. Sleazy, disgusting, mean-spirited. That's why it's a masterpiece. Next up is The Beyond, directed by Lucio Fulci. This was first released in the United States as Seven Doors of Death. It was a butchered version of the movie. If there are DVDs of that still floating around, avoid that at all costs. Get this one. This is from Grindhouse Releasing. This is a 3-disc set. It's 2 Blu-rays plus the soundtrack, which is great because the soundtrack by Fabio Frizzi is awesome. It's an awesome movie. It is just an absolute nightmare in film form. So definitely give this one a look. Next up is the infamous Pieces, directed by Juan Picure Simon. Hopefully I said that right. This movie is just out of control. It's one of those movies that has to be seen to believe. This is another one from Grindhouse Releasing. There's the Blu-ray, and it also comes with the soundtrack. I love how some of these boutique video labels include the soundtrack with these movies. Next up from 1983 is Mausoleum, directed by Michael Dugan. I discovered this one a little bit more recent. It was 2018. I saw it on Amazon Prime during October, and then a month later, Vinegar Syndrome puts this out on Blu-ray for their Black Friday sale. This is that Blu-ray that they put up for sale. There's the original one sheet right there, and has an interview with the special effects guy, John Carl Buechler, the late John Carl Buechler. This is one of his earlier projects. So check it out. It's nuts. So my favorite horror film from 1983 is Stephen King's Christine, directed by John Carpenter. My favorite movie from 1984 shouldn't be that big of a surprise. It is A Nightmare on Elm Street, directed by the late Wes Craven, starring Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. Let's not forget Heather Langenkamp, Johnny Depp in his first role, the great John Saxon. What else could I say? It's A Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, it's one of the two biggest franchises of the 80s, between this and Friday the 13th. I mean, they pretty much defined the 80s. This movie scared the crap out of me when I first saw it. I think it was about 8. And I loved every single minute of it. And it's still a pretty powerful movie. This Blu-ray is from New Line Cinema via Warner Brothers. It's a very, very bare bones collection of all 7 Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I'm hoping that a more comprehensive box set for this comes out, because I think this entire series deserves that. And the TV show Freddy's Nightmares deserves to be a part of it. Alright, runners up for 1984, we start with the infamous Silent Night, Deadly Night. I first saw this image in a newspaper ad when I was 7, when the movie first came out, and I thought that this was too much. I did not have a sense of humor about it. I didn't have a sense of humor about anything back then. But seeing it as an adult, I just laughed at how outrageous it is. And it's a fun time every time I see it. Speaking of holiday horror, of course, Gremlins. Still a pretty effective, pretty funny, pretty scary movie, even after 40 years. So good on Joe Dante, who directed the movie. Next up is The Mutilator, directed by Buddy Cooper. A piece of regional filmmaking, this time North Carolina. This is the Blu-ray from Arrow Video. I blind bought this one because I heard so much about it, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and finally Arrow put out a decent Blu-ray of it. It has a charm to it. Plus, it has a theme song called Fall Break, which was the original title of the movie. If you hear it once, it's going to be stuck in your head. Trust me. Lucio Fulci's The House by the Cemetery. This is from Blue Underground. There is the one sheet on the cover, and this is a 3-disc set booklet with writings in the movie. There are the discs, one of which is the soundtrack. Very, very cool. I love Lucio Fulci. I mean, who doesn't? Of course. So my favorite horror movie from 1984 is A Nightmare on Elm Street. I had plenty of choices to pick as my number one favorite of 1985, but I went with my heart, and I chose Fright Night, written and directed by Tom Holland. No, not Spider-Man Tom Holland. So I first saw this movie on HBO. When it first premiered on HBO, I was 9 years old. I absolutely fell in love with it, and it's still one of my very, very favorite horror films of all time. The cast is amazing. The cinematography, the atmosphere is great. It's funny at times, but it's still pretty scary at times. Runners up for 1985, we have Return of the Living Dead. First saw this in the 90s, and it became a late night staple for me. This is the Scream Factory Collector's Edition, of course. We have the one sheet on the case. Lots of bonus features, including a feature-length documentary. There's a work print of the movie. Great effects, great soundtrack. It is undeniably iconic. Keeping with the zombie theme, Day of the Dead, directed by George Romero. This is the 3rd film in his Living Dead series, and it is the bleakest of those first 3. But the effects by Tom Savini, excellent. This is the DVD from Anchor Bay. I love it because it opens up like such. It is a 2-disc set, and it comes with this awesome booklet here. I never made the upgrade to a Blu-ray because I just love the packaging on this, but I will get it eventually. Next up is The Stuff, directed by Larry Cohen and starring Michael Moriarty, Garrett Morris, and who else was in it? There was another Law and Order alumni, Paul Sorvino. Paul Sorvino's in this too, and this is another fun one. It is funny. It is gruesome at times, but it's also a great commentary on consumerism. Last but definitely not least is one that is also near and dear to my heart. That is Reanimator, directed by Stuart Gordon, loosely based on a short story by H.P. Lovecraft. This is one of the wildest movies to come out of the 1980s, for sure. This is the Arrow Limited Edition. It comes with a booklet, and in the booklet is a reproduction of the limited comic adaptation of the movie. Also comes with a bunch of postcards, and there's a 2-disc set. One is the unrated version, and the other one is an integral version, which includes a lot of scenes that were ultimately cut out of the movie for pacing reasons. So this movie has a pretty awesome cast. You have Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, Bruce Abbott, David Gale, and others just giving it their all. The effects are amazing, and it is just wild, especially that climax. So my favorite horror movie from 1985 is Fright Night. My favorite horror movie from 1986 is another Italian import. This time, it is Demons, directed by Lamberto Bava and produced by none other than Dario Argento. I used to see it on video store shelves back in the day, but I figured with the cover of that VHS, my mom would shoot me down if I asked to rent this. So I had to wait until the DVD era to catch this. This Blu-ray right here is a steelbook. This is from Synapse Films. Here is the back cover. We have a repro of the Metro movie tickets, a Synapse catalog. For some reason, I don't know why, I kept the back card. And there are the Blu-rays right there. Sick artwork. It is a fast-paced, wild, sometimes nonsensical, but gory, gooey goodness. All right, runners up for 1986, Maximum Overdrive. The first and so far only movie directed by author Stephen King. And I just love this garbage movie. It's still fun in its own stupid way. This is the movie that introduced me to AC/DC, and that was one of the first hard rock bands I ever got into. Next up is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, directed by Tobe Hooper. And this is the Vinegar Syndrome Deluxe Edition. There's the back cover right there, the late Dennis Hopper, and all his unhinged goodness. And we have that classic one sheet as a slip cover. There's an alternate one sheet. Same thing on the case itself. All the bonus features there. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a movie that I was forbidden to watch when I was little. For whatever reason, my mom thought it would be too scary. But it was actually my dad that let me watch this, and I had a ball with this one. I was grossed out, terrified at times, but it was a good time. And I never got a chance to revisit it again until my brother bought me the DVD for Christmas. When was it? No, this was many, many years ago, and I just fell in love with it all over again. So this is definitely high up there. Last but definitely not least, we have The Fly. I don't know if you can see that. That is very, very white. Directed by David Cronenberg, starring Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. Very well done film. Very thoughtful film. Very tragic film. But it's also a very gross film. In fact, to this day, which is more than 30 years later, I still wince during that arm wrestling scene. This is a DVD from 20th Century Fox. There was a box set by Scream Factory that has every single Fly film, The Fly, The Return of the Fly. I don't remember what the third one was, but also David Cronenberg's The Fly and the sequel to that movie. Haven't made the upgrade yet, but still plenty of bonus features to enjoy here. So my favorite horror movie from 1986 is Demons. My favorite horror film from 1987 is another no-brainer. That's The Lost Boys, directed by Joel Schumacher. I love this movie. I first saw it when my mom rented it when it first came out on home video. She probably liked it because of the guys. She also bought the soundtrack too, so we used to play that in the car a lot. So there's some memories attached with this movie. That's what makes it special for me. In addition to that, I actually got to live in the city where this movie was filmed. That was Santa Cruz, California. That's where I went to university. So there's a lot of emotional attachment with this movie. Plus, it's still a good movie. Still scary, still funny. This is one of those movies that actually is able to do both and do it really well. So good on everybody. Okay, my runners-up for 1987, we're going to start with this one. This is The Gate, directed by Tibor Takacs. I probably butchered that name. This is a Canadian horror film. This would qualify as a heavy metal horror movie because a couple of kids use a record to unwittingly open the gate to hell in their backyard. So, fun. Next is more John Carpenter with Prince of Darkness. I first saw this on Halloween morning in 1988. I woke up and found my mom and my brothers already awake and watching this movie, and I knew it was a John Carpenter movie. It looked like a John Carpenter movie, and it definitely sounded like a John Carpenter movie, and I thought it was really, really good. There's the one sheet on the case itself. Another Scream Factory Blu-ray. Alright, one more runner-up for 1987. That is Hellraiser, written and directed by Clive Barker. I don't know if this was really appropriate for me to watch even at 11. This is, of course, the Scarlet Box. This was released by Arrow, and this collection actually has 3 Hellraiser movies. It has the original one, Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, and Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. Little quick tour of this box set. It has all the movies housed in their own individual cases. There's bonus features on another disc. And it also has this thick hardcover book, which I still haven't gotten through yet. And it also has a 2-sided poster. There's Pinhead on one side, and Pinhead again on the reverse. Pretty cool. And I just love the back of the box as well. That is so cool. So Arrow Video recently re-released all 3 of these movies in a newer box set called The Quartet of Torment, which includes the 4th movie, Hellraiser Bloodlines. And I'm not going to switch this out for that one. I'm just going to wait for Bloodlines to get its own individual release because I really want to know more about the story behind that movie. So my favorite horror movie from 1987 is The Lost Boys. Much like John Carpenter's The Thing and David Cronenberg's The Fly, my favorite horror film of 1988 is a highly regarded remake. That is The Blob, directed by Chuck Russell. This is probably one of the grossest horror movies from the 1980s. The effects are still amazing after 35 years. Still a great story. Just takes the concept of the 1958 original and adds some modern elements. Offers a different origin for the Blob. This is an example of a horror remake done right. This is another Scream Factory release. I'm glad they put it out because Sony licensed it to the now defunct Twilight Time, and that Blu-ray sold out really, really quick. So thank you, Scream Factory, for putting this one out. Okay, runners up for 1988, we have Night of the Demons, directed by Kevin S. Tinney, who also directed Witchboard before that one. That's a good movie. This one is a great movie to watch on Halloween night. It involves a bunch of kids who go to a haunted house to party on Halloween night. One of them gets possessed and chaos ensues. Another Scream Factory steelbook. There's the back cover right there. You're invited to Angela's party. I love the quote there. That is great. I love this movie. Speaking of Scream Factory steelbooks, this is a recent pickup. This is Killer Clowns from Outer Space, another beloved movie. This is directed by the Chiodo brothers. It's not necessarily scary, but it is a lot of fun. Next up, we have Phantasm 2, directed by Don Coscarelli. And this was my entry point to the world of Phantasm and the Tall Man and the Silver Spheres. I saw a TV ad for this, and I thought, Phantasm 2? I never even heard of Phantasm 1. I watched this anyways, and I liked it enough that I sought out the original one eventually. It came on late one night on Cinemax, set a timer for it, watched it, loved it, became a Phantasm fan ever since. This particular Blu-ray is from the 2017 box set of all 5 Phantasm movies that was released by Wellgo USA. Next up is a movie that I missed out on the first time around. I didn't get to see it until I was in my 30s, and well, better late than ever, I guess. This is Pumpkinhead, directed by special effects wizard Stan Winston, and this is a fun movie. Lance Henriksen's in it. Lance Henriksen is great in everything he does. I mean, Aliens, Near Dark. Finally, for 1988, we have Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. This was the comeback movie for the franchise after Season of the Witch bombed horribly. I like this movie. It's a decent enough sequel. Danielle Harris is great in this movie, and so is Ellie Cornell as Rachel. I may or may not have had a little bit of a crush on Rachel when I first saw this movie. So, my favorite horror movie of 1988 is The Blob. My favorite horror movie from 1989 is another Stephen King adaptation. That is Pet Sematary, directed by Mary Lambert. Very thoughtful movie about grief and about acceptance, and still kind of frightening. Yeah. Plus, it's got a great theme song by the Ramones. This particular Blu-ray was released in 2019 by Paramount to coincide with the remake that came out that same year. I haven't seen the remake, don't particularly want to. I only have one runner-up for 1989, and it is this one, Fright Night Part 2, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. This is one of the most criminally underrated sequels of the decade. And it's a goddamn shame that it's still regulated here in the States to this DVD, this full-screen DVD. This is a worthy follow-up to the original Fright Night, and it needs a domestic Blu-ray release ASAP. So my favorite horror movie of 1989 is Pet Sematary. So there you have it. Those were my favorite horror movies from each year of the 1980s. Thanks again to Matt from the Accusation Network for inspiring me to make this video. And I want to hear from you. What are some of your favorite horror movies from the 1980s? Go ahead and leave them in the comments. If you like this video, and I sure hope you do, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this. Until next time, I hope you have a very happy Halloween.